And we're here. Let me just soak in your faces. It's so good to be here with you. And we've had 58 people sign up for this day for grief and gratitude. I am amazed. 58 of you have said, I'm willing and I'm prepared to look at grief. That's something we don't often do in our Western society. And we've already got a problem because this is not working properly. So, thank you. I'm so excited to be here. We have a big day, and there are so many wonderful activities. I'll just give a brief rundown. We're going to have this service here. This thing in the middle, we're actually going to use the rocks on your chairs to build something in the middle here. We're going to have lunch together, and then we're going to have 6 different groups, which I'm sure you're all excited about. So outside, we're going to have wooden planter box building. Up here, we've got the rock wall climbing. A table over the back, we've got repurposing card and paper. Over here, we've got keto bread making. Out of the door, could I have my water, please? Out of the door, we've got succulent propagating. And down here, where we normally have the kids' room, we've got some spiritual practices happening. So that's the outline of the day. We get to eat together, we get to do some fun things together. So let's look at grief. It's a big topic. And Henry Nouwen says, the degree to which we grieve our losses is the degree to which we are compassionate people. Now, I want to be a compassionate person, so that means that I need to grieve my losses. And we've got a biblical precedent because Jonathan, when he was killed in battle, David commanded his troops to lament. Lament. That's a word we don't often hear nowadays either. And we have been through a global season. The whole world, we've lost a whole bunch of stuff. So we need to grieve our losses. And different cultures, I'm very aware, process grief differently. Sometimes we do it this way, in how we're dressed. In our Western society, other cultures, black is not that colour. It should be white that you wear for that colour to demonstrate that you're grieving. But in the West, we tend to medicate, deny, go around it. Sometimes we can medicate with work, which actually means we get a promotion and then we get higher pay. There are other sorts of addictions too, aren't there? How many Netflix movies did you watch? I watched plenty. You know, we can binge TV. And how much sourdough did you eat? There's plenty of that around, wasn't there? Thanks to my daughter in our household. It was great. And how many COVID projects did you do? I've heard of so many people doing COVID projects. We were forced into isolation, but sometimes we choose to isolate ourselves. We choose to withdraw. And sometimes we can be really, really superficial about it. Oh, God's working everything for good. He's still on the throne, which is true, but it's also a little bit surface because it's not really disclosing how you're actually going. So, what happens if we don't grieve our losses? Well, we end up repressing it, we stuff it down, and we can end up acting out. There can be behaviours, unhelpful behaviours that we do. So a book I read recently was by Bill Browder, who is an investment tycoon turned justice advocate. And the book was called Red Notice. It was a great read. And he says just in a book I was reading. You know how God does that? He feeds things to you in all of your circumstances. And he says, eventually the feelings will find their way to the surface. And the more you've bottled them up, the more dramatically they will burst out. He says, recognising the pain is the most important one. So, grief. Definition. Deep mental anguish as that arising from bereavement. Deep, poignant distress caused as if by bereavement. Now, I don't want to underestimate the trauma that we go through when somebody close to us dies. It's huge. But I think those two little words, as if by bereavement, helps us to be able to broaden the scope of what grief looks like, because there are other things in our lives that we've lost and that we grieve over. My throat's not doing so well, is it? So just listen to these words on the definition of grief. These are the synonyms: agonise, bleed, hurt, mourn, suffer. I'll say them quickly: sorrow, anguish, woe, regret. They're awful words, aren't they? They're heavy. Yet that's what we're talking about here today. Peter Scazzero says, we cannot grow into maturity without absorbing and integrating our losses, allowing God to do deep work in us. Remember, Jesus was called the man of sorrows. So again, we have a biblical precedent, don't we? This next slide I found really, really helpful. Oh, it's quite small. I'll read it out to you. The top one, it says people tend to believe that grief shrinks over time, that it gets smaller. But what actually happens is that we grow around our grief, as in the bottom picture. Now, I found that a really, really helpful visual because we can grow around our grief. We have a book in the Bible called Lamentations, a whole book of lament. But they received a revelation of God through their loss, and they declared, the steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. Great is your faithfulness. So that's a symbolism of them growing around their grief. And 2/3 of the Psalms are laments before the Lord. So, first of all, how do we grieve? Well, psychiatrist Elizabeth Kubler-Ross says there are 5 distinct stages of grief. Other experts talk about 12 different stages. So there's denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. But it seems from my research that most experts in the field say the first step is to pay attention to your feelings, to actually feel your feelings, the pain, the anger, the crying. Remember, Ezekiel lamented, Daniel grieved, and Jesus wept. Sometimes they describe grief as an iceberg. You know, the iceberg that you can see this much of it above, but there's all this much bigger down below. And we need to ask those questions about what's underneath the surface. What am I mad about? What am I sad about? Because so many things are hidden to us. I'll just pause. Exploring the iceberg. Whew. So how do we experience the iceberg? Well, the symptoms of grief, because they actually affect our physical body, is that we could get an upset stomach, frequent colds, fatigue. Cumulative fatigue is what we've been through these last couple of years, and it's added on, it's grown. Cumulative. There's chest pain and shortness of breath. Sounds like symptoms of COVID itself, doesn't it? So, pay attention to our feelings. And one of the ways that we can explore the iceberg is to wait on the Lord. Again, we can think of people like Hannah, who went, month after month to the temple. She waited. And then, as the third one, let the old birth the new. Because God does want to turn it around and bring something fresh and new and different out of it. He is the God of resurrection, as we will celebrate next week. And you think of that kernel of wheat, it goes down into the ground, and unless it dies, it doesn't reproduce, it doesn't bring forth. It's that metamorphosis process. And each of us is going to do it differently. Each individual process that you go through is as unique, as your own fingerprint. So we don't need to compare ourselves with, oh, they look like they're doing okay, or, how have they got energy for that? Because everybody does it different. So Rick Warren, after the death of his son, said, if you don't grieve, you're going to get stuck emotionally. And then you spend the rest of your life reacting to something that happened a very long time ago, and you take it out on the people who are around you. So what can we actually do? Well, we can sing songs of lament. We can give people space. We can listen to each other's stories. So that's part of what these groups are this afternoon. It gives us an opportunity to listen to each other's stories and what's actually gone on for each of us. Journaling, for me, has been invaluable, and many people will say that. Actually getting stuff out on paper, looking at and feeling your emotions on the paper. Got some people here who love to journal, haven't we, Chris? We can write our own songs of psalm of lament. In fact, there's a piece of paper on the resource table back here. Greg Traynor from a vineyard, Cabramatta Vineyard, has put together a thing of how you write your own psalm of lament. And there are rituals, one of which we're going to be doing here today. So the rocks on your chairs are for you to, because we're going to explore some of the things that we've lost and some of the things that we've gained. So if you would like to, there's a rock on each chair with a pen, and if God brings something to the surface for you, you can write it on the rock, no obligation, but it's something that you can do. Write it on the rock, because we're going to be letting go of some stuff as we come and build a memorial here. And that might be something that's really important for you to let go of. So I just wanted to prime you for that so that you can be preparing. And then another way that we can deal with grief is times of silence and stillness. Not to get something from God, but just to be with Jesus and let it go. So today, we're going to be looking at some of my learnings about grief. Just turning this around. So feel free to take whatever is relevant for you, because it might be some of my journey and it doesn't mean a thing to you. But as John Wimber said, eat the meat and spit out the bones. So if there's something that God highlights for you that's valuable for you, then take it on board. But if not, just let it go. So my example, is that Ron Matheson, a member of this church who's in Uganda at the moment, his father died between 2000 and 2004. And why do I remember that, you may ask? Well, because the night I saw, when I was in his life group, and he heard that his father had just passed away, and God showed me that night that I was grieving the loss of my father. Only my father was still alive. But he was in England. He was removed from me. He wasn't available to me. He couldn't help me babysit my 4 young kids. And he couldn't teach me how to make his wonderful onion soup. And he's still alive. We're looking 20 years later, my dad is still alive. Now, he can't get out of bed, and Mum is in and out of hospital. So that's another layer of grief for me. But we've all been through 2 years of lockdowns, of COVID, of complete change in the way that we live our lives. And ongoing grief can be hard to deal with. So we're going to look at 4 things, give you some framework. First one is expectations. What's that got to do with grief, you might say? Well, the definition of expectations is anticipation, assurance, and prospects of inheritance. The synonyms are promise, or prediction, or likelihood. So basically, expectations have an intended result. When you have an expectation, you expect that that's going to happen. So for me, I could have had an expectation that my father or my parents would be around to fulfil their grandparenting duties. Isn't that a reasonable expectation? Most of us experience that. I could have an expectation that I would continue to have freedom of choice over my own body regarding mandates for vaccines, regarding travel, regarding the opportunity to have a job and connect with friends. We could have an expectation that my husband, as protector or provider, would fix the house. We could even have an expectation that the COVID dog that we bought would play fetch. We could also have an expectation that as living here in Victoria, there would be no earthquakes. And when expectations are not met, they can result in disappointment and in anger and anguish. And expectations in and of themselves are really good things to have. They're like dreams, they're like aims, goals, and we can, head toward those. But sometimes we can inadvertently associate judgments with those expectations when they're not met. So expectations was the first one. Judgments. What's a judgment? Well, the dictionary says it's the process of forming an opinion by discerning and comparing. Synonyms are common sense, understanding, wisdom. They sound good, don't they? There's also a legal definition of a judgment, as Vera would know. A formal decision or a determination by a court, a ruling or a verdict. So in my case, an example, and remember, sometimes our judgments bear little relation to the truth of the matter, but rather my perception, my understanding of the truth. So I could have made a judgment over my parents that because they should have moved here to Australia to be with me, even though it was my choice, well, probably his as well, to come and live in Australia. But I could have made a judgment over my parents over that. I could have made a judgment over myself that I was selfish to move here. I could have made a judgment that mandates are wrong for not allowing me choice. I could have made the opposite judgment, that people were wrong in arcing up about mandates because they're there to protect us. Can you see? It depends on your perception, doesn't it? We could say, yes, this was right, or no, this was right. It's how we perceive it. Could have made a judgment that the husband that doesn't fix the house doesn't care. Could have made a judgment that that COVID dog that I bought that doesn't play fetch is a stupid dog. Or that Australia is an awful place to live in a place of fires and flooding rains and now earthquakes. So when judgments are made, they also result in changed perceptions, because when you put yourself in a position of a judge, it tends to be that the people or the situation or the circumstance aren't measuring up. It tends to put you higher and them lower in your perception. And it is a legal language. So judgments that we make are legally binding statements. Ooh. It also has actions in our behaviours, because we tend to think of, stupid dog. And can result in resentment. But it also leaves us bound to that situation. So we need to release our expectations to God and break off any inappropriate judgments that we have made, so that we can be free to forgive. Forgiveness, don't we love that word? Definition of forgive: to offer pardon. So is it a let-off for those who've done wrong? No, it's not. Does it mean that we condone their actions? No. Does it mean we have to trust them again? Absolutely not. Trust has to be earned. So is forgiveness a get-out-of-jail-free card, like in the Monopoly game? Yes, it is. But for me, not for the person who I'm offended at or who I need to forgive, because it doesn't touch them. I'm the one that suffers. So it's a gift. Forgiveness is a gift that God gives his children. In Matthew 6, it says, "Forgive us our sins as we forgive those who sin against us." It goes on to say, "For if you forgive men their trespasses, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive men their trespasses, neither will your Father forgive your trespasses." Ooh. That's big, isn't it? So if I want to be a compassionate person, I have to deal with grief, and I need to forgive people. So forgiveness is a choice. It's also a commandment. He just said it right there. So Walter Mikac, whose wife and 2 children were massacred in Hobart, said, listen to this, "I don't need to be angry. I can miss them, his family, and feel emotions, but not hang on to this ball and chain." And that's what unforgiveness is, isn't it? It's like a ball and chain, because it does weigh us down. It does have effects. So we need to be specific about who we are forgiving and what we are forgiving them for. So I can forgive my parents for living in another country. I can forgive myself for any selfishness that there might have been in me, because I wanted to come to Australia for what we deem to be a better lifestyle. We can also choose to forgive the politicians for for the mandates, or the people for their responses to the mandates. We can forgive them that perhaps actions meant, perhaps in good faith, have resulted in damaged relationships and in financial and mental ill health, for some way of saying it. We can forgive the dog that doesn't play fetch, or Australia for its climate. So when forgiveness is made, it results in changed perceptions. Did you hear that? That was the same thing as judgments, wasn't it? Judgments result in changed perceptions, but sometimes for the worse. Forgiveness also results in changed perceptions. It gives us freedom and improved attitudes. So, David, would you mind helping me get these whiteboards up, please? Now, we're going to look, I want your input, please, for what are the things that we are grieving over? What are some of the things that we have lost during this COVID time? Now, oh, you've got the pens, beautiful, lovely. So I'm going to start off with the first one because I mentioned it earlier, which was choice. So I'm hoping that all of you will, if you'd like to, if you're brave, be able to call out some of the things that we are grieving over at this particular time. Because remember, it's good to actually identify what they are. This is part of exploring the iceberg. So, what else have we lost over this last little while? Family, absolutely. We haven't been able to touch base anywhere near like we would like to. Some people have lost employment. It's very true. Yep. Haven't been able to catch up. Yeah, money. Yep, if we've lost employment, we haven't had the money. Pardon? Yep, which is choice, yep. Ooh. Yep, travel. Absolutely. Pardon? Yes, totally. That's a good one. So, social gatherings? Oh, so I'm just going to put gatherings. Can I do that? Oh, nice little mess here. Yep. Lovely tar. Pardon? Ooh. These are good, guys. Oh, lovely, thanks. Oh, yes, yes. I went to the shops just yesterday and there was so much blank spaces. Products. Yep, freedom. Yeah, tell me more about that one. Oh, yes, yes. Yeah, which could come under gatherings, but yes. Fun. What was that other one? Community, yeah, gathering together for worship. Yes. Healthcare. Yes. And healthcare. Yeah, particularly for those scheduled events or things that needed to happen because COVID took over and so many other things were postponed. So, yes. Yeah. Beautiful. Yes, I've got that on my list too. There's been a whole lot of unpredictability, hasn't there? You know, oh, do we wear masks now or do we not? I can't remember. Oh, is it 5 or 25? Yep. Remember, grieving is the healing feeling. Did you hear that? Grieving is the healing feeling. So, the reason that we need to forgive is so that we don't get caught in bitterness. So, Hebrews 12:14-15 says, work at living in peace with everyone. Work at living a holy life, for those who are holy will not see the Lord. Look after each other so that none of you fails to receive the grace of God. Watch out that no poisonous root of bitterness grows up to trouble you, corrupting many. So what is bitter? Well, it's a taste sensation, but it defiles me. It defiles everyone under my influence and does nothing to the person I'm bitter at. Bill Johnson says, bitterness is the spirit of murder in diapers. So in seed form. Because it's undeveloped murder in the heart. Whoa. Bitterness is the spirit of murder in diapers, in nappies. It's drinking poison, hoping that somebody else will die, and it destroys the vessel that it's in. So, forgiveness, simply agreeing that forgiveness is the right thing to do, doesn't actually make it happen. Sometimes there's actions involved. You might need to make a phone call. It might be a behavioural change. It might be praying for people who've died. It might be praying for their descendants. Communion is a really good way of realising my undeserved forgiveness that God has granted to me and how much more I need to give that to other people. So, Martin Luther King Jr. says, forgiveness is not an occasional act, it's a constant attitude. So, in summary, David, would you mind coming up here, please? Oh, I need the scissors in the back. I'm hoping. Yep. Can you hold the mic for me, please? So, in summary, here's my rock. Oh, yes. It's got all these things that is hanging on to me while it's in my pocket. And so I need to release, if I can do it, release my expectations, break off my judgments, so that I'm free to forgive and then I'm clean to give it to God. To actually come and release it, to let it go. So, other thing, sorry about this, running back and forward. Just wanted to put this on because the antidote to bitterness is thankfulness, is gratitude. Remember the whole day is grief and gratitude? And look how putting on something else transforms you. It's amazing. So, yeah, but I look different, don't I? So, gratitude. We know what gratitude is. It's pleasing. It's also in the Bible. It says, always be thankful in Colossians. And in Thessalonians, it says, be thankful in all circumstances, not for all circumstances. Be thankful in. For this is God's will for you who belong to Christ Jesus. So thankfulness is healthy. It's better than a multivitamin. It actually has a beneficial impact on almost every major organ in your body. Thankful people live healthier lives. Please don't hear I did not say that if you've got a health issue that you're not thankful. That is not what I said. I said thankful people lead healthier lives, and it is God's will. There are so many benefits, but I think I'm running out of time. So I'm going to skip over all the benefits, and you can do your own research. So, thankfulness. During COVID, we've actually gained a lot of things too. I'm going to write them in a nice bright colour. So, what are the things that we have gained during COVID? Where's Marg? Of? Okay. I thought you were going to start with Zoom. Now, can you see this colour? Just? Appreciation. Zoom. Now, I was lots of hands. I'm going to come closer so that I can hear. Space? Yes, we've definitely gained some rest time. Yes. So, family. So, discoveries. Yeah. Yes. Absolutely. In the community. So they both go together, don't they? Local community and kids playing. Who's got to know their neighbours better? Yeah, absolutely. Children playing. Yep, we didn't see them before, did we? They were all inside. Creativity. Absolutely, some of those COVID projects. Creativity. Yes. Yes. So there's a commonality. Yeah, and yeah. Commonality. Ah, JobKeeper. Isn't that funny? Here we are. That was some of the things that we lost, and yet... And yet, it's also some of the things that we gained. There was another one. Family appeared on both. So see how it depends on our perception, because we've lost relationships with our wider family, and yet we got more time with our close family. So it's all about our perception. Yes, any more that you want to go through? Oh, good. Yet time. And hasn't it been interesting going back into living our full-on lives and how that's actually continued the fatigue? Peace. Tell me more about that. Yep. Beautiful. So there are benefits of slowing down. Yeah. Yeah. There are wide. Yeah, greener. Oh. Now he's going somewhere. Yeah, tell me more about that one, Simon. Yep. Beautiful. And we do appreciate the benefits of technology so much more, don't we? So, thank you. We need a change of pace, so if you would like to, could you please stand? Because thankfulness takes the attention off of ourselves, and it's an antidote to bitterness and resentfulness. And thankfulness also shows that contentment and peace come from not what we have, but who we know. So we've looked at expectations, judgments, forgiveness, and bitterness. So let's just together, you can do it silently or out loud. It's totally your choice. But just we're going to ask God a question while we're here together, and then just pause for a little bit to hear what he wants to say to us. So you can close your eyes, you can keep them open, it's your choice. So Father God, is there anyone I need to forgive? Now, for some of you, there will have been faces that come across your mind's eye. There would have been names. And you can choose, here and now, to forgive. We can say, oh, sorry. Oh, I said sorry to the stand. We can say, I choose to forgive whoever that person is for whatever it is that they have done. And I release them and I bless them. But we might need to look at those expectations and those judgments. We might need to do some further work on that. So we're going to have opportunity, and David is going to come and share some more with us about what they did in the Bible.
Didn't she do a great job? It's been good. Really, really good. Thank you, Karen. So, if you haven't already, and while I'm talking, feel free to write on your rocks. I noticed that when I wrote on mine, that the pen was visible initially, and then it's faded, which is not what we wanted initially, but what I'm seeing is that I can keep writing things on it, because it keeps fading, and I just keep putting more on it. I'm like, this is good, because more people's names have been coming to mind. Means I've got a lot of work to do, yeah, maybe, but also because there are other issues that are in me that I need to deal with, and I need to be part of that. So feel free to write on those as they come to mind as I'm doing this, as I'm talking, and please use the pens. If they don't work, put your hand up, and we've got more pens here, and they can be passed around. So if it doesn't work on your rock, please let us know. I'm going to move forward a little bit. I feel a bit cramped by these whiteboards. Right, we're going to look at the Word of God together. So if you've got a Bible, if you've got a smartphone, have a look at Joshua. We're going to look at Joshua 3 and Joshua 4 and have a read through that together. So as you're doing that, I'm just going to tell you a little story. Nice to see you, Rick. It's really a story about a ritual that I did a number of years ago, and I was at college at that time, and it was the anniversary of my father's death. My father died when I was 12 years old, and this was only a couple of years ago, so we're talking 40 years later, and this is the whole thing to do with how loss can stay with you for a long, long time. And at that particular day, I participated in an activity or a ritual that two ladies in my class organised. It was an unexpected ritual. I'd never participated in anything like this before, and I don't remember a lot of the details, but I remember we took some rocks and we put them on a table. It was outside in the grass area, and we recalled things to mind that were important to us at that time and that we'd lost. And I recalled my father's death and what had happened. And I released that pain, I released that loss that I had, and I gave the pain to God. And it was a very powerful and unexpected moment on that particular day. And I hadn't really even been expecting it to happen on that day, but the ladies just used that ritual to help bring to the surface something that God was wanting to do. And there was a step forward into freedom that I experienced that day that I hadn't really realized I still needed. But God knew I needed it, and it really broke something in me. And so I want to encourage you today that these rocks that you've got and this little ritual we're going to do at the end of my little talk just now, it hopefully will be a physical thing that you can participate in, as I did on that day a few years ago, to help you to process any loss, any pain, anything that's still there that God has brought to mind that might help you. And that's all this is today. It's a ritual that will help you to process what happened to you, and particularly during the COVID lockdowns over the last 2 years. Let's read Joshua chapter 3, starting at verse 14. And I'm reading from the NIV. And I'll read through to chapter 4, verse 9. Joshua chapter 3, verse 14. So when the people broke camp to cross the Jordan, the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant went ahead of them. Now the Jordan is at flood stage all during harvest. Yet as soon as the priests who carried the Ark reached the Jordan and their feet touched the water's edge, the water from the upstream stopped flowing. It piled up in a heap a great distance away at a town called Adam in the vicinity of Zarethan, while the water flowing down to the Sea of the Arabah, that is the Salt Sea, was completely cut off. So the people crossed over opposite Jericho. The priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord stood firm on dry ground in the middle of the Jordan, while all Israel passed by until the whole nation had completed the crossing on dry ground. Chapter 4, verse 1. When the whole nation had finished crossing the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, "Choose 12 men from among the people, one from each tribe, and tell them to take 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, from right where the priests stood, and to carry them over with you and put them on the place where you stay tonight." So Joshua called together the 12 men he had appointed from the Israelites, one from each tribe, and said to them, "Go over before the ark of the Lord your God into the middle of the Jordan. Each of you is to take up a stone on his shoulder, according to the number of the tribes of the Israelites, to serve as a sign among you. In the future, when your children ask you, 'What do these stones mean?' tell them that the flow of the Jordan was cut off before the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord. When it crossed the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. These stones are to be a memorial to the people of Israel forever." So the Israelites did as Joshua commanded them. They took 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, according to the number of the tribes of the Israelites, as the Lord had told Joshua. They carried them with them to their camp, and they put them all down. Joshua set up the 12 stones that had been in the middle of the Jordan at the spot where the priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant had stood, and they are there to this day. Memorials remind us of the past. They help us to not forget what happened and acknowledge the things that we have experienced. Now, we've all experienced COVID pandemic and lockdowns and mandates and things that have been put upon us that we didn't want to have. We didn't necessarily want to have that experience, but we've all participated in it and been involved in it. So a memorial can help us to acknowledge that those things happened, whether we liked it or not. And that's what happened with the Israelites. They were creating a memorial to what had happened to them for the years previous to them crossing the river that particular day. So Joshua, under the command of the Lord, created a moment in time for the people of Israel. They marked the moment to help the Israelites to remember what had happened and what God had done for them. So it's a bit like they remembered the grief, they remembered the stuff that had gone on, and they also were thankful for what God had done for them. And that's what the memorial did. So Joshua 4, 7 and 8, have we got that slide? Joshua 4, 7 and 8 says this: "These stones are to be a memorial to the people of Israel forever." So the Israelites did as Joshua commanded them. They took 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, as the Lord had told Joshua, and they carried them over with them to their camp, where they put them down. And you might think, it's just a big pile of rocks. What does that matter? It's just a bunch of rocks. Who cares? What big deal? What's in a bunch of rocks? Well, actually, what's in the rocks are the memories, the experience of a lifetime, the experiences of your past and what you've been through as a people. So the Israelites were a group of people who had been together in the desert for 40 years. We're a group of people who've experienced a pandemic for the last few years, and we've all been through that experience together. So a pile of rocks can demonstrate what we've been through and can help to physically represent what we've experienced. So the action of taking the rocks and forming something is like a monument to a moment in time and space, relating to what occurred to you and to your family and to your people and to this world. So I won't labour on this anymore, but time and space is really important because we are moving through time and space every day, every moment. There's a time and there's a space. Where you're sitting right now, what you're doing right now, you are occupying time and space. And so by marking the moment, this is time and space moment, and it's a memorial that you can, I did that on that day. I was part of that. I cooperated and I made a choice to do that on that day. So the time and space that you've experienced in the past points to this moment, and you say, from this moment forward, it's going to be different. And that's the moment that I did that. That's why it's important. And that's why God was pointing to Joshua to say, get your people to do it. Grab those rocks. Make this a moment that you can point back to and even tell your children about. I was there and I did that. We crossed through the water and we left the desert behind. So let's give you a bit of context about this. The stories of Israel and it led up to this particular day was really important. So Moses is dead. So, right, he's been leading them for years and years, but he's now dead. Joshua's the new leader. And they've had 40 years of wandering around in the wilderness like a bunch of nomads with their sheep, wandering around. What on earth is going on, God? Why are we here wandering around? And they've suffered loss and death for 40 years. So the whole generation has died out in the desert. It wasn't a great experience. It wasn't fun. Just wandering around the desert aimlessly, wondering why we're here. It was a painful time, and they'd lost friends, they'd lost family, they'd lost loved ones, they'd lost their sense of direction and purpose. They didn't know what was going on. They were hoping they'd get across the river one day, this new promised land of Canaan, but it still hadn't come yet. So there were all of these losses, all of these things they were grieving that hadn't yet occurred. But they came to this moment where they could cross the river into the new Canaan, into the new place of promise. And Joshua said, now's the time. God said, now's the time. You're going to cross the river. You're going to leave all of that pain behind. You're going to leave that loss behind. You're going to leave that wandering around in the desert. You're going to leave all of those things that were really weighing you down. And this is a time to remember. And you're going to mark it. You know, you're going to do something significant that will help you to process the fact that that happened. But this moment means you're now moving into the next thing God has for you. It's a time to remember the greatness of God. It's a time to make a memorial to say thank you to what has happened. So Israel is told by God through Joshua to follow him through the water, to take up some rocks, and then to move and to obey and to do it in faith and to create a memorial to what God has done. So it's both things, isn't it? It's both acknowledging the grief and the loss of the pain of wandering in the desert for 40 years, the fact that they've actually lost loved ones, that have all died, they've had this terrible time of 40 years in the desert, but they're also creating a memorial that says, God provided for us. God gave us water in the desert. He gave us quail. He gave us manna. He was with us and never left us. There was always his cloud of presence with us. So it's both. God understands us as human beings. He understands that we suffer loss and pain every day. But he also realizes that out of that loss comes new things, births beautiful things, creative new things that come because of what we can see from what we've learnt and go into the new and form that which God is bringing to birth in and through us. That's why memorial is important, because it helps us to say that is what I want to participate in, and that's when it started, that's when that stopped, that's when this starts. Now, for these people wandering around in the desert, they were grieving a bunch of things. So they grieved at the difficulty of being in the desert, eating angel wafers and quail and spring water for donkey's years. I mean, you imagine eating dry toast with Vegemite for 40 years, every day, and a few chooks, right? Imagine doing that. I'd get over that really quickly. They were grieving for their disobedience to God and to Moses. Right, grieving their own foolishness for what they did and what their forefathers did. There was grief for being dragged into something they didn't want to do. I mean, some of them didn't want to be in the desert wandering for 40 years and didn't want to leave Egypt. And they didn't want to live in Sinai. They didn't want to do that. That was God's idea, wasn't it? A bit like Karen said, leaving England It was her idea, and yet she was like, well, why didn't my parents come with me? And a bit like some of them in the desert saying, well, I wanted to leave Egypt, but I didn't think I was signing up to this wandering in the desert for 40 years thing either. So it's a bit like us not wanting the pandemic and having to endure the longest lockdown in the world, living in Melbourne. No, that was forced upon us. We didn't choose that. It's a bit like the Israelites also didn't choose to have to wander in the desert for 40 years. But there was action. God was saying, you need to act on this. You need to, I'm moving you on. I'm wanting you to act on it. So they had to follow. They had to obey. They were asked to be involved in this, taking these rocks to recall the event. They couldn't live in the past, and they needed to create a ceremony or a ritual that would help them to focus on the gratitude, acknowledge the loss and the pain, but to acknowledge God's power and presence with them as well in the desert, and almost like a baptism passing through the water. So that's what they were doing. So in a summary, that ritual and that moment, it was like, this is a time to cross through the river, to pick up the stones, to create a memorial about the past, and to create and be thankful for the new things God has done and will do. So the pile of rocks we're going to form today could be just that, a pile of rocks. We could just come and we just stick a bunch of rocks in the middle here and, yeah, fun experience. Or they can be a significant memorial for us as a church, as individuals, and they can help to trigger and to recall and process and retell what happened and the loss that you suffered, the things you've experienced, the grief that you've felt, and the pain that's been there. Remember I said that I had that experience of my father's death from 40 years ago and that there was still something there. And God used that to trigger that to help me to move on and not let it to continue to affect me negatively. And we can also use this little ritual we're going to do to help to recall the amazingly awesome God that rescued us and was with us and encouraged us in the middle of the difficulties and the challenges that we went through during the COVID period and the lockdowns. Now, one of the reasons I think this is significant today, what we're going to do, is that sometimes, as Karen gave that illustration with the bottles and the little black dots inside the bottles, is that our past experiences and the situations and things that we've been through can be just forgotten. They can just fade because we get busy again. We get caught up in life, we get on with doing stuff, and we forget about what we suffered. And they can just be almost ignored, and we forget about the pain that we had. But the problem is that it's still there. And also the blessings and provision of God that He did for us during that period can also be forgotten. We just get caught up in the business of life, and we don't acknowledge it, or we don't express gratitude for it. So it's important that we don't do that. So that in both things, we don't just move on with the busyness of life and forget about what we've been through the pain, but also through the blessings that God provided. So this memorial today that we're going to do, or this activity, is about symbolism for us of the activity that you had, of God's activity in your life, in this time and place, in this moment, here in Melbourne, today, in this church, as part of this group. So this is what I think we can choose to say. On this day, I'm choosing to make a memorial to what happened. I'm not going to forget it, but I'm also not letting it go to determine my destiny. I am letting go. I acknowledge the pain and the grief and the loss, and I choose to forgive and let go and be thankful. You just absorb that for a moment, and then I'll read it again. On this day, I am choosing to make a memorial to what happened. I'm not going to forget it, but I'm also not going to let it determine my destiny. I am letting go. I acknowledge the pain, the grief, and loss. And I choose to forgive and let go and be thankful. So just as Joshua said to the people, get ready. We're going to cross the river. We're going to pick up some stones. The priests are going to go first with God's ark, His presence. And God is present here with us today. We know that God has said, wherever 2 or 3 gather, I'm there with you. So God is here with us. Then pick up the stones, walk through the river, and then place them down once we get to the other side. So we can be like the Israelites. We can pick up our stones. We can put this into practice. We can place them down together and create a moment, a memorial to the loss and the grief and to the thankfulness we have for his goodness to us during the pandemic while we were lost in the desert, in that sense. So I want to paint a picture of some of the similarities from what I've read of Joshua and the Israelites and us. We were forced into a pandemic and lockdowns that we did not want to have. We experienced a loss of freedom and movement, having to do what we did not like. We suffered a loss of health or well-being. Perhaps we lost loved ones or a normal life we once knew. Perhaps anger, pain, sorrow, poor health due to a grievous situation. Alternatively, perhaps we need to acknowledge the love and provision and peace and rest and space that we had during that time, and that he was with us and comforted us. And that we today can create a memorial of stones together to help us to remember and to acknowledge. As a way of personal illustration, I want to just tell you a little bit about my own journey. At the end of 2019, my mother passed away, 95 years of age. And then the bushfires happened, and we had to run away from East Gippsland because we were out near the bushfires. Then we came back here to Melbourne, and when we had to move house, and then COVID hit. And then I had a shock job loss. I was made redundant from my job due to COVID. So I was unemployed. And then there were the lockdowns and loss of movement. And then my daughter got married and left home. And it just kept piling on. Just more and more things just kept heaping on top of me. There was so many pressures on my life at that period. And it just caused so much grief and so much loss in my life. It wasn't a happy time. It was very, very difficult, and difficult for all of my family. I felt lost, I felt alone, I felt very full of grief. A bit like being in the desert, really. It wasn't fun. And I came to a point one day where I chose to forgive. I went for a walk, and I remember saying, okay, I am choosing to not hold on to this. I'm choosing to let it go. It is not going to determine my life. I am choosing to let it go and not let it be the thing that makes me who I am. Even though it's been terrible and I've hated all these things, I'm choosing today to say no and to forgive and to let it go. Did it all get better in one day? Those who know me well would say no, but it's taken time. As I've slowly processed those things and acknowledged those things and worked through those things, worked through with my loved ones, and realised that some of the stuff that was there was God renewing me and changing me and identifying things in me that needed to change. And that's what God does. He brings us through these things because he knows the stuff that we've been stuck in that needs to change to become the more of the godly person that he wants us to be. So life is improving, definitely. I have a new job and I have blessings from God that's just amazing. And the grief is less painful, and I've moved on, and I'm moving into what God has next for me, and I'm so grateful for that. And it's really exciting to see that. But marking the moment is part of that process. And if you don't want those things in the past to continue to determine who you are and to hold you captive, then you have to make that choice to say, I today am not going to let that hold on to me anymore. I am choosing to let it go. And you alone can do that. Just like I had to do that. I had to make that choice. And that's what God's given us. When he says, if you don't forgive, I won't forgive you. That's because it's about the fact that you, as a spiritual being, have the freedom to choose. And if you don't, then you stay bound by that choice. It's not like he's holding it out on you. And so I let go of that grief, and it no longer holds onto me. So I'm inviting you into a space today to do that with me, for us to do it together, that we're going to do that together, that we're going to pick up our rocks. If you've already written on it, then great. If you haven't, then write some more things on it. And we're going to bring them together and put them down on this piece of green fabric, and we're going to process this stuff together. And we're not going to rush. We're not going to make this hasty. We're going to take it our time. And if you need to just sit and wait for a few minutes and write some more, pray some more, if you need to get on your knees, if you need whatever, then take that time. This is not a rush. We're not rushing into this. If you just want to sit there for a while, that's fine. If you're ready to go, I'm done with this, God, I want to get this dealt with, then come straight out the front and put the rocks in the middle there. And we'll share that together. I'm going to place this down on the ground. We're not going to play any music. We're just going to do it in silence. We're not going to talk. It's just a ritual to mark the day. And we're going to process to walk this through the pathways. You can see I put on the floor some arrows. So if you come in either through the middle or through the sides, one at a time, and just place your rock there. You can kneel if you want. You can stand. You can do whatever you. Just make way for others to come if you're waiting, and just come and place the rocks there, and just pray as you do it. Offer it up to God. So in silence, you can write, you can wait, you can pray, you can write, you can come, you can kneel, you can pray, you can leave, you can do whatever you like to do.